Nautiluses are the least well known of the living cephalopods for most people. However, they are ancient and highly unique animals, with many interesting adaptations seen in no other organisms alive today. As usual, a document with the sources for the images used, along with research papers I found useful, will be included in the description of this video. Nautiluses are molluscs and cephalopoda. Molluscs are members of the phylum Mollusca. This is a massive group of invertebrates, with an estimated 23% of all marine organisms being molluscs. It is in fact the second largest phylum of all, only behind Arthropoda, the phylum with insects, arachnids, crustaceans and their close relatives. Molluscs are defined by their soft body comprised mostly out of muscle and their mantle. The mantle is a layer of tissue covering the body and their vital organs. In many species, the mantle is covered by a shell, but this is certainly not true for all molluscs. They have various other similarities as well, but many of these are only found in some species, not all, or have been heavily modified in many species, making it unrecognizable. For example, they all have a foot, but in something like an octopus, this has become its arms. Molluscs are also the only organisms with radula. These are rasp-like organs to scrape their food when feeding. However, not all molluscs have radula, so while it is only found in this group, it is still not useful as a diagnostic feature. I am not going to go into detail about the species included in the molluscs, mostly due to time, but here is a quick overview of the main groups. Members of Aplycophora do not seem to have common names, but they are shell-less, deep-water, burrowing invertebrates found worldwide. Chitons in the class Polyplacophora have shells made up of 8 different plates, making them flexible, while still giving them strong protection. They are exclusively marine, and often live in the tidal zone. Monoplacophora are another deep-water group, and they have a single cap-like shell. Many of them superficially look similar to limpets, but limpets are gastropods, while Monoplacophora are in their own class. The next 3 are the groups of molluscs that people will be the most familiar with. The first is the gastropods, with the slugs, snails, and limpets. Next are the cephalopods, which is the one we are looking at today, but it contains the nautiluses, squids, and octopuses. Also, as a side tangent, I know some people are going to correct my plural of both octopus and nautilus. I am going to stick with adding an ES on the end, but there is a debate for using octopi or nautili instead. Going back to the ancient Greeks suggests that the plural of octopus should actually be octopodes, but if I'm going to say that throughout the video, it is highly likely people would not know what I am referring to. So I am taking the simplest option and will continue adding S to the end, as is common in English. The last of the commonly known groups are the bivalves and bivalvia. This includes the clams, oysters, cockles, mussels and scallops, among others, known for having a hinged shell. The last of the major classes of mollusca are the tusk shells and Scaphopoda. They are possibly the group most closely related to the cephalopods, and they often have long tusk-like shells, giving their common name. The first cephalopods are thought to have emerged during the mid to late Cambrian period, around 500 million years ago. The end of the Cambrian did face one of the known mass extinction events. This caused the extinction of many marine animals, with shelled animals being hit particularly hard. While this extinction event is remembered primarily for its massive effect on the trilobites, still, the cephalopods at the time did have shells and were also affected. However, they were not wiped out completely, and so the survivors entered the next period, the Ordovician, and were able to take advantage of newly unoccupied niches. In the case of the cephalopods, this was as macropredators. Likely due to this, the Ordovician was when the cephalopods really became a dominant group, with the Nautiloids as their main representatives. And now, 500 million years later, nautiluses can still be found in the oceans, although they are not as diverse as they once were. The cephalopods are distinguished from other molluscs as the foot that all molluscs possess has been modified into multiple arms and or tentacles that are much more adept at manipulating objects in their environment. It is hard to give a more precise definition than this, as, while the squids and octopuses are similar in many ways, the nautiluses often don't share in these similarities. There are 3 main groups of living cephalopods. As you might assume from the brief look into their evolution, the most basal of these is the Nautiloids. The Nautiloids include the nautiluses that are still around today, as well as their closest extinct relatives. Their most distinctive feature is their shell, which may be similar to other molluscs, but sets them apart from the other living cephalopods. The next group is the octopodiforms, with the octopuses and the vampire squid. Distinguished by having 8 arms, these include some of the most intelligent vertebrates known. The final group is the decapodiforms, with the various orders of squid and cuttlefish. They have 10 limbs in total. They have 8 arms, the same as the octopuses, but also have 2 long tentacles. Their tentacles are different to their arms in that they only have suckers near the ends, while the arms have suckers along their entire length. The tentacles are longer and serve a different purpose, being specialized for grabbing prey. The arms can also be used for grabbing prey, but also have various other functions, such as manipulating the prey once caught, or in reproduction or behavioral displays. There is far more to go into about both the octopuses and the squids, but they deserve their own videos, so today I will focus on the Nautiluses. So, on to the Nautiloids then. First, using the term Nautiloids versus Nautiluses. Nautiloid refers to the subclass that includes the extinct relatives of the Nautiluses alive today. Nautilus, on the other hand, refers specifically to those still around today. Technically, it should only refer to those in the genus Nautilus, but it is often used to refer to both living genera. Like other cephalopods, nautiloids have a beak-like mouth. They eat mostly crustaceans, and this mouth is used to pry their prey from rocks. Their radula is in their mouth and only has 9 teeth. As I've already mentioned, their most distinctive feature is their large shell. Early nautiloids were extremely diverse and had a wide variety of shell shapes and sizes. The ones that have survived into the modern day all have a similar shell shape. This is the tightly coiled shell that gives nautiluses today their distinctive spiral-like appearance. Nautiloid shells are divided into chambers that get progressively smaller. These chambers are separated by thin walls known as septum, or septa in the plural, while the tougher outer wall of the shell is known as the conch. The main body of the animal lives in the large outermost chamber. When it grows larger, the rear of the mantle secretes a new septum, making the shell grow a little larger. The septa all have a fleshy tube known as the siphuncle running through them. The siphuncle's primary purpose is to empty water out of the chambers as the shell grows. This is done through osmosis. They are able to control the salinity of the blood in the siphuncle, causing the water to diffuse from the chamber into the siphuncle, allowing the nautiloid to drain it. This is actually an extremely important adaptation, as being able to drain the water from the shell makes it lighter than the surrounding water, essentially giving them a buoyancy aid when swimming, similar to the swim bladders seen in bony fish. One consequence of this buoyant shell is that it means when the nautiloid dies they float on the ocean currents for some time before sinking down into the depths. This means that their empty shells can occasionally be found far outside their normal range. This also means that caution needs to be used when inferring their preferred environment when inspecting nautiloid fossils. Just because they were found in a particular type of sediment does not mean that that was where they lived when alive. Living nautiloids swim using jet propulsion. They do this by using a funnel-like structure known as a hypernome to draw water into their living chamber and then pushing it out forcefully. They can control their route by pointing their hypernome in a different direction. While jet propulsion is an inefficient means to travel for the energy costs involved, nautiluses actually are the exception to this. They are surprisingly energy efficient, and this is at least partly due to the buoyancy of their shells. One large difference between the nautiloids and the squids and octopuses is that nautiloids can have any number of tentacles, from 50 to about 90. Note that these are tentacles and not the arms found in octopuses and squids. This number changes based on the species, the gender, and even individual variation. These tentacles do not have the suckers seen in other cephalopods, but still stick strongly to anything they attach to. They achieve this by secreting a polysaccharide substance. To release the object they have adhered their tentacles to, they contract their muscles. Not all of their tentacles are sticky. Nautiloids actually have 3 different types of tentacles, and only the so-called digital tentacles have this feature. The ocular tentacles are found near the eyes and act purely as sensory organs. They can detect chemicals in the water, similar to smelling. Labial tentacles are the 3rd type, and these are most often used during mating. If you know about the sense and intelligence of octopuses, do not assume that nautiluses are similar. Nautiluses have similar senses to what it was assumed that cephalopods 500 million years ago had, as opposed to the more advanced octopuses and squids, which first appeared about 100 million years ago. Nautiluses have highly developed eye structures, but these lack a sophisticated lens. Without the lens, their vision has been compared to that of a pinhole camera. I have already mentioned their smell with their ocular tentacles, but this is believed to be the primary sense they use to hunt. Because their brain is structurally simple, especially when compared to octopuses and squids, researchers have long assumed that nautiluses are not particularly intelligent. However, research from the late 2000s up to the present suggests that this assumption is wrong. Despite the different brain structures, nautiluses do have both short and long-term memory, and are able to use this to change their behaviours accordingly. One advantage nautiluses have over octopuses and squids is that their genitals regenerate after they have laid their eggs. Other living cephalopods only lay one clutch of eggs in their lifetime, after which they die. Nautiluses do not share this limitation. Females spawn once per year, laying their eggs in warm waters. They can be laid singly or in small batches, and the young take 8 to 12 months to hatch. Nautiloids were extremely diverse at their peak, with over 2,500 known fossilized species. Today, there is only one family of nautiloids, containing 2 genera with 9 living species between them. Well, I say 9 species because that is the currently accepted number, but there is certainly more research going on into the nautiluses to try and work out this exact number. 3 of those 9 species were only described in 2023, so this is very much a recent topic of discovery. The first genus is Allonautilus. These live in deep water, so are much less well known than the second genus Nautilus. The 2 genera have very different morphologies, but recent research suggests that Allonautilus is actually descended from those in Nautilus, making the second genus paraphyletic. This means that some species in one genus are more closely related to species in a different genus than they are to some in their own. As a result, a paraphyletic group, in this case a genus, does not contain all descendants of the most recent common ancestor. As I have already said, more research is needed into this to sort out the phylogeny of nautiluses. The first species is the Bali-chambered nautilus, Allonautilus perforatus. It is only known from its shells drifting in the ocean currents. A living specimen has never been found. As such, it is one of the least known species, aside from those only recently discovered. The shells are only found in the waters around Bali in Indonesia. Since an alive one has not been found, it is thought that they might be a deep water species, which would be much harder to find. Given the uncertainty as to whether it is even a valid species, I am surprised it has an entry on the IUCN Red List. Given that it does, it is not surprising that it is listed as data deficient. The shells are popular at markets on Bali and are often brought as souvenirs, although some are also sold to museums. The shells often have octopus marks on them, suggesting that they are a major predator of this species. The shells can get up to 18 centimeters or 7 inches in diameter. The other species in this genus is the Crusty Nautilus, Allonautilus scrobiculatus. They are native to the waters around New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. They are found at depths of 150 meters to 400 meters, or 500 to 1300 feet. This is a rather narrow band of habitable depths, but they have low heat tolerance, meaning that going too close to the surface can kill them. Likewise, they cannot handle the pressure in deeper waters. This species is easily recognizable due to their large umbilicus. The umbilicus is the cone-shaped space within the whorls of a coiled mollusk shell. In the Crusty Nautilus, their umbilicus is about 20% of the width of the entire shell at its widest point. They also have a thick, slimy covering on the shell that looks a little like hair, hence the common name of crusty. They were originally placed in the same genus as the other nautiluses, but were moved to their own genus due to the structural differences in their shells, gills, and reproductive systems. They are only rarely seen. An article published by the Smithsonian in 2015 claims that a sighting of it had only been reported 3 times, twice in the 1980s and then once more in 2015. Because of this, the Crusty Nautilus is not well known. Unsurprisingly, it is listed as data deficient by the IUCN. You might start to notice a common theme with these species. Most of the general information we know about nautiluses comes from the 1 or 2 most well-known species, but little is honestly known about most of the others. Moving on to the other genus of living nautiluses, we start with the Bellybutton Nautilus, Nautilus macromphalus. This species is distinctive as it lacks a callus. This is a feature seen on most nautiluses that covers their umbilicus. The lack of this leaves their whorls visible, and is also probably where the common name of Bellybutton Nautilus comes from. They are found in the waters around New Caledonia and northeastern Australia. They are the smallest of the living nautiluses, having a diameter of around 16 centimeters or 6 inches wide. They eat crustaceans, but are also opportunistic scavengers. They are preyed upon by sharks, octopuses, and fish like triggerfish and groupers. This is yet another nautilus that the IUCN lists as data deficient, since much about them is still unknown. While they are not the most well-studied species, it is thought that all species live about 15 to 20 years and have a low rate of reproduction. This makes them susceptible to overfishing. Since they are found near New Caledonia, they may also be impacted by mining operations, which are common in that region. Lastly, this is a species reliant on coral reefs, so their degradation is also a major issue for them. We are now getting into the 3 species only described in 2023. As a result, these will be very quick, as little is really known about them. They are all closely related, as it is believed that they split off from each other due to geographical barriers, as all 3 species are isolated from each other by at least 200 kilometers of deep water. The first of these species is Nautilus vanuatuensis, which, while it doesn't have a common name, I will call it the Vanuatuan Nautilus based on its scientific name. As you might expect, based on this name, it is native to the waters around Vanuatu. It can be distinguished from other nautiluses by the very red colour of their shell, which often forms a striped pattern. While they do live in similar depths to other nautiluses, about 200 to 400 meters, they can frequently be found in very shallow waters, at only 5 meters or 16 feet. Nautilus samoaensis, which I will call the Samoan Nautilus, is only found in the waters around American Samoa. Their shells are browner than the Vanuatuan Nautilus, but this may be an effect of the colour changing and the reds being lost when the shell dries. Their stripes are in a zigzagging pattern, although the colour looks more smudged as it nears the centre of the whorls. They are around 17 centimeters or 6.5 inches in diameter, so are a little bit larger on average than the Vanuatuan Nautilus. The last of the newly described species is Nautilus vitiensis, which I will call the Fijian Nautilus. They have only been found in the waters around Fiji. They have been seen at night, so likely come to the surface to feed at that time. They have noticeably less coloration on their shells than the other species. Moving on to the more well-known species, we have the chambered nautilus, Nautilus pompilius, sometimes known as the pearly nautilus. This is actually the best-known nautilus species. Inside, the shell has a layer of nacre, more commonly known as mother of pearl. This does make the shells highly sought after by tourists and collectors alike. On the outside, the shell exhibits countershading. Countershading is coloration aquatic animals often use to try and hide from predators. It is when the top of their body is a darker colour and the underside lighter. This means that predators below them in the water will have a harder time to see them against the brighter waters near the surface, while aerial predators, or those higher in the water column, also have a hard time seeing them against the darker depths of the water. They have a gender ratio that heavily biases males, with only about 25% being female. They lay no more than 10 eggs per clutch, and these can take over a year to hatch. Newly hatched juveniles are only 2.5 to 3 centimeters in diameter, but grow to about 6 to 7 centimeters within their first year. This information is assumed for other nautilus species, but was based on research performed on the chambered nautilus. Next is the white-patched nautilus, Nautilus stenomphalus. They are only found in the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. There is some argument about whether this is a subspecies of the chambered nautilus, but it is often included as a separate species. They can also hybridize with the chambered nautilus, and these offspring have less than a 1% variation in DNA from either parent. The white-patched nautilus is a little different in that the hood protecting the opening shell is different, and the edges of their shell are less smooth. They typically get to around 18 centimeters or 7 inches in diameter, but can get as large as 20 centimeters or 8 inches. Finally, we come to the Palau Nautilus, Nautilus belauensis. It prefers depths of 150 to 300 meters or 500 to 1,000 feet, but can be found both higher and lower than this range at times. They tend to stay in this range, as it is the perfect temperature for them at 16.6 degrees Celsius or 61.9 Fahrenheit. Their shells will implode from the pressure if they reach 680 meters or 2200 feet below the water's surface. They are larger than the chambered nautilus and have the characteristic reddish-brown stripes many nautiluses seem to have. As juveniles, they are mostly striped, but as they mature, much of their living cavity becomes white. As the name suggests, they are found around Palau, but also around the Caroline Islands, which are to the north of New Guinea. It is the only nautilus species included on the IUCN Red List that is not data deficient. They rate the Palau Nautilus as near threatened. Like other nautilus species, their slow reproduction means that any pressures on their population could severely impact them. Having said that, the Palau Nautilus does have some things in its favour. The coral reefs around Palau are actually in very good condition compared to other reefs around the Pacific. Fishing is also heavily restricted in the area, which is good as they would otherwise be very susceptible to this. I hope you enjoyed this video. Nautiluses are ancient cephalopods that are still around today, although in much lower numbers. The remaining populations are poorly understood, as shown from the addition of 3 new species only a year or two ago, and there are still disagreements over whether some of the ones I've covered are valid species. Even so, these fascinating cephalopods are often forgotten about by the mainstream public. Unless they associate Nautilus with the name of the submarine in Jules Verne's books 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and The Mysterious Island anyway. I did want to give that a small mention, as despite being published in the 1870s, they are still the only real pop culture references to nautiluses. At least many real-world ships, spacecrafts and submarines are named after them, so I guess that is something. Anyway, thank you for listening, and feel free to suggest another group of animals you want to see me cover in the comments.